News presents Charles Wilson's Tour of Duty.
The year was 1943, and World War II was raging. A 20-year-old Charles Wilson enlisted in the Army on the heels of his brother Ernest.
I was very pleased when I was drafted. We all wanted to do something for our country.
On February 5th, 1944, Charles left his hometown of Los Angeles to Camp Hood in Central Texas for basic training. That summer, young Charles traveled to Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri for his final training with the 70th Division. The journey of his lifetime was about to commence. In October, Private Charles Wilson boarded the USS West Point in Boston and sailed across the Atlantic, where he quickly learned the rules of the high seas.
Choose the top bunk because the bottom bunks were prone to getting secretions from those above.
5 days after landing in Marseille, the 70th Infantry made the perilous journey through the snow to Brumath, France, then walked with full gear to the front lines in Bischwiller. In December 1944, the 70th Infantry marched to Suffenheim to hold a defensive position along the west bank of the Rhine River. On January 2, 1945, they marched back to Camp Oberhofen to prepare to move to the Mauterhaus area. They traveled to Zittersheim to continue their defensive position ranging from Volksburg to Ingwiller. This tested their resolve, braving the bitter cold and with rationing becoming necessary.
The food we got was not great, but whatever it was, we got it.
By January 8th, the 70th Infantry was absorbed by the 276th. Charles and his fellow soldiers moved from Zittersheim to Mulhausen to take 4 hills that were heavily defended. On January 11th, in the Haguenau forest, they were met with heavy artillery fire, and Charles was wounded by fragments. Disregarding his own injuries, he returned to the battlefield under fire, rescuing 2 wounded riflemen and bringing them to safety. He also guided 3 members of his platoon and another wounded man to the command post. It was only after saving these 6 people that he allowed himself to be treated for his own wounds. In fact, if it weren't for one little brass button on his uniform that stopped a piece of shrapnel, Charles Wilson would not have made it back at all. For his actions, he was awarded a Bronze Star and the Purple Heart.
When you're with your men, you feel responsible. You try to do the best you can to help them, and you can't worry about yourself.
By mid-January, the 276th Infantry was in Wingen-sur-Moder, France. Charles served in the infantry's intelligence and reconnaissance platoon as they continued to defend the Allied territory. Their next mission was to relieve the 411th Infantry in Ferbswiller. They aggressively patrolled from Emmerweiler to Buschbach, defending Allied positions. On January 24, 1945, Charles was awarded the Combat Infantryman Badge for his duty in action.
Listen, when people are shooting at you, you can take a foxhole damn quickly.
In February, Charles was reassigned back to General Patch's 7th Army in Forbach to rescue prisoners of war. By March 3rd, they had liberated the French town and proceeded to march across the border into Germany. Although they were met with little resistance when crossing the border, it was by no means safe, as the Schaffhausen area was riddled with landmines. By March 26th, they arrived at the picturesque town of Volklingen. From Volklingen, the infantry was off to give relief to the war-ravaged town of Rheinballen. In April, Private Wilson was promoted to sergeant, and his infantry was stationed in Hanau to maintain the peace as the war was winding down. And then, on May 8th, the news came that everyone was waiting to hear. It was Victory in Europe Day.
We had lost a lot of men, a lot of things, and it was a tough, tough time. I just assure you, I can't explain how happy we were.
In the summer of 1945, after interrogating German prisoners and maintaining order in Kassel, Germany, Sergeant Charles Wilson was ready for some serious R&R. He danced in London. He went to the pictures in Leicester. He saw shows of many different varieties in Paris and Alsace. In fact, in December of 1945, the Army paid Charles's tuition to study acting for a semester at Trinity College in Cambridge.
I also was able to learn enough to be part of a play that we made in London.
Then, in April of 1946, after his time of leisure and study in the UK and France, it was finally time to return stateside. He landed in New York, was debriefed at Camp Hood, and discharged at Fort Bliss in San Antonio. And then, home. As he stepped off the train in Union Station in Los Angeles, his brother Ernest was right there waiting for him. He gave Charles a hug. Then he gave him something else, a business card.
And I looked at it and said, wow, how many people work for us? And he says, you and me.
And that is where our story begins.